York's got a lot of problems right now. Rising crime, an asylum crisis, and rents nobody can afford. And only 28% of New Yorkers approve of the mayor, who they voted for. But is this all really his fault?
Not good news for New York Mayor Adams. His approval rating has fallen to its lowest yet, just 28%, lower than any other mayor's approval rating in over a quarter of a century.
Oh, he's doing an awful job. Clearly, one of the things that people are responding to is what they see around them. Homelessness on the streets, fear of crime.
New Yorkers are angry. I join that anger.
Spokesman for the mayor said incorrect polls come out every day, but the real numbers can't be questioned, he said.
The homeless rate is high, the crime is high, and the train station, the transit, it's awful.
That is a police drone. You see it floating up there? It's being used by this truck to monitor the protest that's going across the street at the New York Times building. And between this conflict, the asylum crisis, and rising crime, Mayor Adams' approval has sunk to the lowest level ever recorded. And recently, the mayor has championed some pretty unpopular budget cuts to fire, police, and sanitation. And the reason the mayor has to make those cuts, even though there's protests like this going on all over the city, is because New York is completely out of money. And at the same time, many people are upset that the city's not doing enough to care for the thousands of asylum seekers who arrive at this bus terminal and need help.
Now, the mayor is attacking single homeless people. But make no mistake, if he wins this, he will come for homeless children next.
And unfortunately, the city is just completely out of room. Earlier this week, people were seen lining up at a reticketing facility looking to see if any shelter beds were available, because the shelter system is full and they had actually been forced to give up their beds to other new arrivals. And people fear what will happen later this month when families in the city's shelter system also begin getting evicted. And to make matters worse, the FBI recently seized electronic devices from the mayor as part of an investigation into his 2021 mayoral campaign.
Two sources familiar with the matter say the mayor turned over 2 cell phones and an iPad, and later turned over additional electronic devices. The mayor issued a statement saying he's done nothing wrong.
Now, to be clear, the investigation's still ongoing. Nobody's been charged with a crime, but the mayor's enemies may be seizing these opportunities to try and tie him to all of New York City's problems at once. But Eric Adams is the city's 110th mayor and a 22-year veteran of the NYPD, which makes you wonder, is he really responsible for all of New York City's problems, and does he deserve that 28% rock bottom approval rating?
Officials say almost 150,000 asylum seekers have come to New York City seeking shelter since last spring. Each week, the number goes up.
So the biggest issue facing New York right now is the ongoing asylum crisis, which all starts right here in this bus terminal where thousands of people every single week come from the southern border. And although nobody blames the mayor for necessarily starting the crisis, there are people that think he's made it worse. And the figures are just astronomical. Over 150,000 people have come to New York City, and over 60,000 of them still remain in the city's care. And that's why the city's shelters are full. These large tent-style shelters are all that's left. This one's on a decommissioned airfield out in Brooklyn, and it's the wintertime. Nobody's happy about this, but in fact, when asylum seekers first started coming to New York, the city actually had different housing arrangements for them, like luxury hotels in Midtown, like the Roosevelt Hotel, which is also the Asylum Processing Center, and also the Row Hotel, which is a 1,300-room former luxury hotel right here in Midtown. These were the options, but now that so many people have come to New York, they're completely full, and new arrivals don't have that anymore. Now, the mayor's defenders will point out that the reason this crisis is happening specifically here in the city is because of New York's unique right to shelter rules, which only exist in New York City, not the rest of the state. Which could mean it's not the mayor's fault thousands of people come here every single week instead of somewhere else. Now, according to the Coalition for the Homeless, Callahan versus Carey is the court case that established right to shelter in New York. And this was a class action lawsuit on behalf of the homeless, and it ended with the city and the state being obligated by the court to provide temporary shelter to anyone who asks. And over the years, when issues have come up with right to shelter, the city has to ask the court for permission to do or not to do certain things.
This issue will destroy New York City. We're getting 10,000 migrants a month.
Now, critics of the mayor say that in the past, his words about this exact same crisis were very different. But Mayor Adams was only 19 years old at the time right to shelter became law, which means that for most of his adult life, right to shelter has been the name of the game here in New York City. And since it became law here in New York, every single mayor, Giuliani, Bloomberg, Deblasio, they've all come up against right to shelter in some form or another. And since right to shelter is mandated by a court, the mayor doesn't get to decide how it's carried out. And he can't expand the rules or restrict the rules just because he does or doesn't like something. And perhaps when this crisis first began, nobody ever thought we'd see lines of people in the freezing cold trying to get help during the wintertime. And some of the mayor's critics even say that he should be standing in the street with his arms out, turning the buses around. But is that something the mayor can even do? And if he did, it would be pretty bad for the families that were on that bus that had just journeyed halfway across the country to come here, that now had to go all the way back.
Mayor Adams in D.C. today meeting with federal officials about the migrant crisis.
All right, this comes after his last trip was abruptly cut short when the FBI raided his top fundraiser's home. Chris Welch joins us now in studio. And Chris, no disruptions this time?
No disruptions this time, but it remains to be seen exactly what the trip may accomplish.
And I think that's the crucial point here. What else can the mayor do other than obey the laws of the city and the state and the country in which he operates? After all, the mayor is just a mayor, and the crisis he's managing is bigger than New York City, which means he can't stand in the street and turn buses around, and he can't tell people that there's no way to house them because that's not the rule. The rule is the city has to provide housing, which is why we have a revolving door shelter system where people stay for 30 days if they're single, 60 days if they're a family, and then have to leave at the end of that so someone new can take their place. It's a very sad situation. And the mayor's supporters point out that he's already done a lot to try and alleviate congestion in the shelter system. For example, you used to have to stay in a shelter for 3 months before you could request a housing voucher to get an actual apartment. But the mayor's office actually did away with that rule so people can apply much sooner. On top of that, the mayor tried to use many of the city's buildings, which aren't exactly up to code, to try and house people instead of putting folks in a big tent. But unfortunately, the fire code in those facilities didn't meet the city's own requirements, and people who thought they'd landed a safe place to stay had to go back out and reapply for shelter. Now, none of this means New Yorkers should be in love with Mayor Adams, but perhaps he's less responsible for the asylum crisis than his critics might believe. But the one thing the mayor is responsible for is the budget he proposed, which last month had people so upset, portions of it needed to be walked back. So last month, New Yorkers got pretty upset when the mayor proposed a budget that would have had massive cuts to fire departments, police departments, and sanitation departments all over the city.
It used to be cleaner.
I think it's terrible. New Yorkers and tourists alike told us they've noticed more trash in the city, and it's likely about to get worse. Also being cut, the next 5 classes at the police academy.
Nobody wants the cops to do anything, and now you're going to cut them more?
Now, nobody likes trash on the middle of the street, and lately the police have had to respond to certain incidents related to this conflict. And with other types of crime on the rise as well, people are worried that the city could turn into a dangerous dump if funding is cut for the police and the sanitation and the fire department. Which is why at the very last minute, these cuts were pushed back and will be considered again at another time. But unfortunately, in the minds of many people, the NYPD's on the chopping block, and the police have already been cut once this year. And since the city continues to run out of money in an attempt to balance its budget, it's pretty much a guarantee that more savings are going to be looked for everywhere, even if most of what was there to cut in the first place is already gone.
The number of officers is expected to drop by around 5,000 from nearly 34,000 to 29,000 in the fiscal year that starts next July. The Police Benevolent Association president saying in part, this is truly a disaster. Cops are already stretched to our breaking point.
Now, New York City is also dealing with a shoplifting epidemic, which is why cuts to the police are a huge deal, in spite of everything else that's going on. The last thing the city needs is for more stores to close. And over the last 5 years, many of the penalties for shoplifting have been reclassified as misdemeanors. New York City's also eliminated cash bail for many offenses that people have been arrested for, and prosecutors are less likely than they've ever been to go after offenses like this. Which is why when you go into a place like 7-Eleven, the door's damaged and stuff like these donuts are locked up. And beverages, it's a really sad state of affairs. But remember, the mayor is a 20-year veteran of the NYPD. And when he ran for mayor, he actually had the support of the police union. And there's probably people still at at the NYPD who used to work with the mayor when he was an officer. And New York City isn't Judge Dredd, where the judge is also the person who arrests you and carries out justice. The mayor doesn't prosecute criminals, the mayor doesn't make the laws, and although some of the mayor's critics would say that he's soft on crime because he's the mayor of New York and that's just how things operate, his supporters would say that he's delayed the cuts to police for as long as possible. And that's in spite of the fact that defunding the police was a popular political slogan going on just a couple of years ago. But the problem for the mayor is that the city still is running out of money, and at some point cuts to police and the fire department and sanitation are going to come back on the table, and he's going to have to decide again what to do. And sadly, the funding cuts have been made up for by other departments, like educational programs and after-school programs. The city actually canceled a youth diversion program called Next Steps, which aimed to keep at-risk youth from falling into the criminal justice system and becoming criminals as adults. And now that crime prevention programs have been cut, it seems like keeping police on the streets doesn't really matter if you're creating more criminals at the exact same time, to some people. Which is why people are asking, is rising crime really the mayor's fault? Or could there be another reason? So once again, we find ourselves in a murky situation here with regards to cuts to the city that might make the whole place worse to live in. But some people think that the mayor's low approval rating is also a byproduct of the fact that he's New York City's figurehead at a time when New York City's not doing well, even if he doesn't have the ultimate dictatorial powers to just change things however he wants immediately. And because of the city's balanced budget rules, certain things will have to change based on how the city spends money. More spending on one thing means there's less money to spend on other things. It's just simple math. And look at this graph of city spending. You can see that public welfare and education are way higher up as far as how much they spend than the police department is. Which means if you're in charge of New York and you need more money to fix it up, you know where to look for it. And maybe departments like education have so much money because they're inefficiently run, or possibly the police have already been cut and they were just cut first and now these other things are going to have to follow suit. But believe it or not, the mayor's ability to spend money actually just got taken down a notch, big time.
New York City Comptroller Brad Lander says that his office has stripped Mayor Eric Adams' emergency powers that allows him to make deals with contractors for migrant services without prior approval.
So the city comptroller has taken back the power of the purse from the mayor. Critics of the comptroller's decision say that the more government agencies that are part of a decision, the longer that decision will take. And they say that that might be a problem considering the city is dealing with so many crises at the exact same time. The ability to act quickly could help things improve, or it could at least stop things from falling apart as quickly as they have been. And with so many buses arriving from the southern border, this could jeopardize how the city is able to take care of the people that are here and need help. On top of it, that's a situation that seems to change every couple of weeks.
Now, how it worked before this was under the mayor's emergency powers, his administration could make a deal with an outside contractor for things such as laundry services for migrants, or to rent a small to medium-sized hotel to house migrants.
And the big question right now is, will anything change, and will the comptroller's office be fast and responsive so that this doesn't make things worse? There's a chance that this renewed oversight will mean the city is better able to spend the money that it has coming in. But the mayor's supporters say that his loss of emergency powers should at least disperse the blame for what's going on here right now. And as New York City tries to recover financially and economically, it's interesting to note that the city's comptroller has different views on the city's right to shelter rules than the mayor does. And the mayor and the governor are actually in court right now trying to have those rules amended, something that the comptroller doesn't necessarily agree with. Which makes it seem like the mayor's between a rock and a hard place. If he tries to cut back on the asylum crisis, families are going to be put in danger. And if he has to cut back on fire, sanitation, and public safety, the whole city's just going to turn into a big mess. And that's got a lot of people worried right now. It seems like there's no good answer. But what do you think the mayor should do? Is he responsible for all of New York's problems? How would you fix the city? Let me know. I'll see you in the next video.